Hi everyone, happy Thursday. I can't believe it's already week 3 of summer 2. But this is my response to our discussion for this week. Um, After viewing the clip, I think that some of the thinking goals that are happening in this clip is that um, she said that she was, thinking about. I think the rest of the video was about her talking to the therapist about, I guess, a previous relationship that she had. And because she mentioned that, thinking about how he was sabotaging the relationship and that she was going to continue thinking about not isolating herself, finding ways to be okay, to be alone. And then as far as behavior wise, she mentioned that she was going to continue with her meetings, which I'm assuming is like with her counselor. And she was going to continue working on trying to let him go. And him, I'm assuming, is, the partner from the relationship or the previous relationship. When I think about the theory that is being used, I thought that it was rational emotive behavior therapy. And some aspects that suggested this theory to me was because based on the short clip, like it seems that the therapist is using like humor to kind of lighten the mood when he's talking to her. He's also focusing on the positives, like really helping the client feel safe and, being very supportive about um, the thinking and the behaving goals that she established. And then also, it really seems like that the therapist is trying to help guide the client towards self acceptance. Hence, why her thinking is about like being okay being alone, trying not to focus on um, the negatives of the previous relationship that she was talking to him about. Um, so, those were just some aspects that I thought why it was rational emotive therapy. Um, When I think about how I would use this approach as a school counselor, uh, I think that this approach could be used to help students cope with like challenges and setbacks. Um, I think a lot of times students get so caught up in having, like Ella says, like these irrational beliefs of like, I must be perfect or I must get all A's or I must do this. And they put a lot of pressure on themselves. And so, sometimes they tend to shut down. And I think that by trying to challenge those irrational beliefs that they have and kind of trying to turn them into rational beliefs and really get them to change their thinking, I think would be helpful. Um, I think also something that they mention is about the use of role play and how you can use role play to help students practice using better behaviors. So instead of just like thinking and changing their behaviors and changing their thinking, um, I think really will help to put it in perspective for them. Um, and I also think that this approach also helps to build resilience and changing the way that students are thinking. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes students get really caught up in the I must be perfect or I must get all A's or everyone must like me. So they try to, be popular and things like that. And, sometimes it kind of goes against like who they are, but they fall into this trap of needing to be perfect and having these irrational beliefs, um, that I feel like this approach would help them to, like I said, cope with the challenges, deal with the setbacks, and kind of reframe their thinking and their experiences, that will in turn help them to develop resiliency. Um, I think one of the aspects that would be easy to implement, would be There was a quote in the book that said a centerpiece of RABT theory is that the behavior should never be equated with the person. One's behavior can said to be bad, but not the person behaving. Um, I feel like I originally thought that would be easy to implement, but I can see how this would be kind of difficult, depending on the grade level that you're working with. Um, like my plan is to be an elementary school counselor or an early childhood school counselor. And I think that getting kids, because they're in this like pre-operational stage and they're very egocentric, when they get in trouble, they automatically like internalize that it's because I'm being bad. And so I think, trying to change that and say like, no, you're not being bad. Your behavior is a bad choice or is, not a good choice. So I think, like I said, I originally thought it was going to be easy, but I think that it leans more on the difficult side because, depending on the grade level, small children can have a lot of irrational beliefs, thinking like everybody has to like me or I won't have friends or I have to do this or I must be that. Um, and out of the three theories, I think the one that would be most effective in my grade level, so let's say kindergarten, first grade, I think rational emotive behavior therapy would be the most helpful. I really like how Ellis breaks it down into like an ABC, like the antecedent, the belief, the consequence. Um, I think breaking it down that way is helpful for kids to kind of reframe their thinking and say like, okay, like one of the examples that the book gives is about how, somebody had a meltdown because they fell down. But, the antecedent is that, or the activating event is that they fell down and then hence their belief was, well, everyone's laughing at me and they're thinking like, what a klutz. So the consequence is that they, overreact or they might have a meltdown. And I think that, especially like in kindergarten, first grade, kids are still learning how to regulate their emotions. Um, and I think by breaking it down that way will be more helpful to pinpoint like what is the behavior and how can we work towards it to help them, to help guide them to make better choices. Um, and then also like Ellis also talks about how we all have a common goal to be loved and to be happy. And I think that especially at that age in kindergarten, first grade, they, get their feelings hurt very easily if someone doesn't want to share their toys or if someone doesn't want to be their friend. Um, so I think that those situations would make it very easy for kids to have these like irrational behaviors, irrational beliefs. And I think that maybe using this approach with kids that young would kind of help them to learn self-regulation and help them to build their self-concept. Well, that's all I have, and I am excited to hear everybody else's thoughts on what theory this was. Thanks.